The Hammer of Wolfsbane, a Ravenglass Legends story, by Cronshaw. Chapter 1. Ragnar sat across from Ulfred in the castle's library, a musty tome open before him. Shafts of light from the setting sun cut through the shuttered windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The tutor stroked his beard and pointed a gnarled finger at an illustration of a Ravenglass warhammer. The Hammer of Wolfsbane, Ragnar. Forged in the fires of creation itself, it is said to possess the power to strike down even the mightiest of foes. Ragnar leaned forward, his eyes tracing the intricate lines of the hammer's head, runes decorating the page around it. "And this is my father's hammer?" Ulfred nodded. "It is a symbol of his strength, his right to rule." He tapped the page. "And one day, it will be yours to wield." Ragnar imagined himself leading the warriors of Mirand into battle, the hammer swinging in great arcs, smashing through shield and bone alike. A commotion rose from the courtyard below, shouts and the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Ragnar shot to his feet and hurried to the window, Ulfred close behind. A lone rider cantered through the gates, his robes the deep red of a priest of creation. He reined in his horse and dismounted, his movement slow and stiff. Ulfred glanced back at Ragnar. "With your father away, you should greet him." "Of course." Ragnar hurried down the steps to the courtyard, his heartbeat quickening. Rarely did priests of creation visit Mirand, and never without warning. He smoothed his tunic and ran a hand through his hair, hoping he looked presentable. The priest stood in the center of the courtyard, leaning heavily on a staff. He looked up as Ragnar approached, his eyes a piercing blue. "I am Ragnar Wolfsbane, son of Ragnar the Elder. How may I assist you?" The priest's lips twitched in a smile. "I seek an audience with your father, young Ragnar. I have travelled far to speak with him." Ragnar shifted his weight, feeling the eyes of the courtyard upon him. "I am afraid my father is away on a hunting trip. He is not expected back for another day." The priest's brow furrowed. "I see, that is most unfortunate. Perhaps I can assist you in his stead." The priest regarded him for a long moment. "Perhaps you can, young Ragnar. Perhaps you can." Chapter 2. Ragnar led the priest to the great hall, gesturing for him to take a seat at the high table. He called for ale and bread, hoping to make the priest feel welcome. Ragnar settled into his father's chair. "What brings you to Mirand?" The priest took a sip of ale, his eyes never leaving Ragnar's face. "I have had a vision, young Ragnar. A vision from creation herself." Ragnar leaned forward. "A vision?" The priest nodded. "I saw the Hammer of Wolfsbane, and I heard a voice telling me that the hammer must be blessed, that it must be purified in the waters of creation." Ragnar's mouth went dry. He knew that his father would never allow anyone else to touch it, let alone a stranger. "I am not sure that is possible. The hammer is sacred to my father, to my clan." The priest's eyes flashed. "Do you doubt the will of creation, young Ragnar? Do you doubt the truth of my vision?" Ragnar hesitated, torn between his duty to his father and his desire to please the priest. "Of course not. It is just, my father has forbidden anyone else to touch the hammer, even me." The priest leaned close. "Your father is a wise man, young Ragnar, but even he must bow to the will of creation. The hammer must be blessed, and it must be done now." He glanced over his shoulder. "Before it is too late." "What would this blessing entail?" "It is a simple ritual, young Ragnar. I will take the hammer to the Temple of Creation, where it will be purified in the sacred spring. It will take but a few hours, and then the hammer will be returned to you, stronger and more powerful than ever before." Ragnar bit his lip. "If it is truly the will of creation, then I cannot refuse." The priest's smile widened. "You are wise beyond your years, young Ragnar. Your father would be proud of you." Chapter 3. The sun hung low on the horizon as Ragnar led the priest across the courtyard and into the mead hall. The great room stood empty, the fire in the hearth reduced to glowing embers that cast long shadows across the walls. Their footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, the sound hollow without the usual clamour of warriors and servants. "The Hammer of Wolfsbane is kept here when my father is away." Ragnar gestured to a small alcove set into the wall beside the hearth, a heavy velvet curtain concealing its contents. The priest nodded, his face solemn. A fitting place for such a powerful artifact. Ragnar stepped forward and drew back the curtain, revealing a stone pedestal upon which the hammer rested. The weapon seemed to pulse with a dark light. Taking a breath, Ragnar lifted the hammer from its resting place, its icy chill biting into his palms. He turned to the priest, holding the hammer out before him. The Hammer of Wolfsbane. The priest's eyes glittered as he beheld the weapon, his fingers twitching at his sides. Magnificent. Truly a tool of creation's divine will. Ragnar nodded. It has been in my family for generations, passed down from father to son, a symbol of our strength and power. The priest reached out, his fingers hovering just above the hammer's surface. And now it must be blessed, purified in the waters of the holiest spring in all of Vieta. Ragnar frowned. The holiest spring, where is that? The priest smiled, his eyes never leaving the hammer. It lies deep within the heart of the Wood, a place of great power and mystery. Only there can the hammer be truly cleansed of any impurities that may have tainted its divine purpose. Ragnar hesitated, his grip tightening on the hammer's haft. I don't know. My father entrusted me with the hammer's safekeeping. I'm not sure he would want it taken so far from Mirand. The priest's gaze snapped to Ragnar's face. Your father is a wise man, Ragnar, but the hammer must be blessed. Surely you can see the importance of such a task. Ragnar swallowed hard, his resolve wavering under the intensity of the priest's stare. I suppose so, but surely I should accompany you, to ensure the hammer's safety. The priest shook his head, a look of regret passing over his features. I'm afraid that is not possible. The journey is long and treacherous, and the blessing itself is a sacred ritual that must be performed in solitude. But fear not. I give you my solemn vow that I will guard the hammer with my very life, and return it to you as soon as the blessing is complete. Ragnar held out the hammer to the priest. Very well. I entrust the Hammer of Wolfsbane to your care. May creation guide your path and bless your endeavor. The priest's fingers closed around the hammer's haft. You have done a great service to your family and to all of Vieta. I will not forget this trust you have placed in me. With a final nod, the priest turned and strode from the mead hall, the hammer cradled in his arms. Chapter 4. Ragnar made his way from the mead hall to find the priest gone. He approached the gates, and a small crowd gathered around the guard post. Ragnar quickened his pace, catching snatches of their conversation. Rode out of here like a wyvern was on his heels. Never seen a priest move so fast in my life. Something wasn't right about him, I tell you. Ragnar pushed his way through the crowd, his pulse pounding in his ears. What's going on? What happened? A guard turned to face him, his expression grim. It's the priest. He just rode out of town at a full gallop, knocked one of the guards down. Wouldn't speak to anyone. Wouldn't be stopped. Ragnar frowned. No, it can't be. But even as the words left his lips, he knew it was true. The priest had tricked him. He had stolen the hammer, and now he was gone. Without another word, Ragnar turned and ran, his feet pounding against the cobblestones. He burst into the dormitory. Kest! He rushed between the cots and shook his friend's shoulder. Wake up! Kest stirred, his eyes blinking open. Rag, what's going on? Ragnar glanced around the dormitory, making sure the other warriors in training were still asleep. I need your help. The hammer. It's been stolen. What hammer? My father's. Kest sat up. What? How? Ragnar shook his head. A priest came to the castle asking to bless the hammer. I let him take it, but he tricked me, Kest. He stole it away. Rag, your father. I know. And I know what he'll do if he finds out. That's why I need your help. We have to get the hammer back, before anyone else realizes it's gone. All right. He threw back his blankets and reached for his boots. What's the plan? We track him down, we find out where he's taken the hammer, and we get it back, without alerting anyone else in the castle. We can do that. Ragnar clasped his friend's shoulder. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably get yourself killed or worse. Ragnar nodded. Probably. He gestured to the door. Let's get this hammer back. Chapter 5. Ragnar and Kest raced through the streets of Mirand. The last vestiges of day clung to the western sky as the moon and stars emerged. You sure about this, Rag? The Vitawood isn't exactly a place for a leisurely stroll. We don't have a choice. The hammer is out there and we're the only ones who can get it back. Kest snorted. Right. Do you actually have a plan? Or are we just going to wander aimlessly through the Vitawood and hope we stumble upon the thief? Ragnar's brow furrowed as they reached the edge of town, the dark tree line of the Vitawood looming before them. I'm working on it. Kest sighed, shaking his head. Brilliant, working on it. That's reassuring. You got a better idea? Yeah, actually, it's called not getting ourselves killed in a cursed forest. Kest folded his arms across his chest. Look, Rag, I'm with you. Always. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just go charging in there without a plan. Ragnar took a deep breath. Kest was right. They needed to think this through. His gaze drifted to the ground, searching for any sign of the thief's passing. The soft dirt at the edge of the Vitawood was scuffed and churned by hoofprints. There. Ragnar pointed to the marks. The priest must have come this way. Kest crouched down, examining the tracks. That's even if these have anything to do with him. The tracks go back to Mirand and they're fresh. I don't know about this. Kest shook his head. This could be anyone. What else do we have to go on? Kest puffed out a breath. Fine. I guess you're right. Ragnar stepped into the Vitawood, the dense foliage swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the musty scent of decay and the faint whispers of unseen creatures. As they ventured deeper, the trees closed in around them. Ragnar scanned the forest floor, searching for any sign of the thief's passage. Broken twigs and disturbed leaves littered the ground, marking a trail that led deeper into the heart of the forest. Look. Ragnar gestured to a snapped branch, its splintered end still fresh and sappy. He must have come this way. And in a hurry, too. He's not being careful about covering his tracks. They pressed on, following the trail of broken branches and trampled undergrowth. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the forest became. Ragnar's hand tightened on his spear, his senses on high alert. A scrap of cloth, snagged on a thorn bush, caught Ragnar's eye. He knelt down, his fingers brushing against the rough fabric. It was the same deep red as the priest's robes. Kest stood over him. What is it? Ragnar showed Kest the cloth. It's his. He stood up, his eyes scanning the area for any other signs of the thief's passing. Rag, look. Kest pointed to footprints, clear and distinct in the soft earth. Ragnar's breath caught. He must have stopped here. Kest glanced back over his shoulder. Must have ridden his horse pretty hard. Or, he knows the path is impassable on horseback. Ragnar picked up the trail again, footprints and hoofprints running side by side. This way. Kest froze. Wait, you want us to go in there? There could be ghosts, direwolves, feral wyverns. Ragnar straightened up, squaring his shoulders. Then we'll just have to be extra careful. We stick to the shadows, stay quiet, and keep our eyes open for any sign of the hammer or the thief. Kest nodded, rising to his feet. And if we do find him, what then? Ragnar's hand tightened on his spear's shaft. Then we take back what's ours. He turned and stepped into the heart of the forest, the darkness swallowing him whole. Kest hesitated for a moment before following, his own spear drawn. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around them, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the musty scent of decay and the faint whispers of unseen creatures. Creepy place. Kest's eyes darted from shadow to shadow. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea. Ragnar ignored him, his gaze focused on the ground before them. The tracks were harder to follow in the dense undergrowth, but he refused to lose the trail. This way! He veered off to the left, creeping through the brush, his senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent his nerves on edge. The tracks led straight to a clearing, where an ancient stone tower rose up from the forest floor. Kest craned his neck. What is this place? Ulfrid told me about these. They're old watchtowers from the age of the clan wars. Can't believe this thing's still standing. Ragnar stared at a snorting sound. He whirled to lock eyes with a tethered horse. It's the priest's. Kest followed Ragnar's gaze. You sure? The thief must be in there. He has to be. His nostrils flared. Let's get him. Kest's eyes widened. Are you insane? We can't just go barging into some creepy old tower. Who knows what's waiting for us in there? Ragnar opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden noise from within cut him off. A voice. Ragnar took a deep breath, steeling himself. They crept forward, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. The tower's entrance gaped before them, a dark, yawning maw that seemed to swallow the light. Ragnar's pulse thrummed in his ears as he stepped inside. The air was thick and musty, the scent of ancient stone filling his nostrils. He climbed the winding stairs, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. And then at the top of the stairs a voice came, low and guttural, chanting in a language Ragnar did not recognize. He crept forward, his spear at the ready. The voice grew louder, the chanting more frenzied and intense. The priest stood before an altar of black stone, the hammer laid out before him like a sacrifice. His hands were raised, his eyes closed as he chanted the strange words. With a roar, Ragnar charged forward, his spear flashing in the dim light. Kest was right behind him, his own spear tip gleaming. The priest spun around, his eyes widening. He snatched up the hammer and swung. The hammer's head collided with Ragnar's spear, shattering the wooden shaft like a twig. Splinters flew through the air as the top half of the spear clattered to the ground, leaving Ragnar holding nothing more than a stick. The priest's eyes gleamed as he swung the hammer in a wide arc, forcing Ragnar to dive out of the way. The hammer smashed into the altar, sending chunks of stone flying. Kest lunged forward, thrusting his spear at the priest's unprotected side. The priest spun around, striking the hammer against the altar. Stone shattered under the force of the blow, and the altar toppled over, its jagged edges hurtling towards Kest. The young warrior barely managed to throw himself aside in time, landing hard on the uneven floor. Ragnar scrambled to his feet. He snatched up a piece of the broken altar, wielding it like a club as he charged at the priest once more. The man met his attack with a snarl, the hammer and the makeshift club clashing. They traded blows back and forth, each one more brutal than the last. From the corner of his eye, Ragnar saw Kest struggling to rise. He gritted his teeth, knowing he had to end this fight quickly. He feinted to the left, then brought his club crashing down on the priest's wrist with all his strength. The priest howled, the hammer falling from his fingers. He staggered back and drew a pair of daggers. Ragnar, watch out. Kest shoved forward, his spear at the priest's throat. Yield. Yield, or die. The priest's eyes flashed, his lips curling back in a snarl. I will never yield. He spat at Ragnar. Not to the likes of you. Ragnar's lip curled. Who sent you? You think I would betray my master? You think I would reveal his name and bring his wrath down upon my head? Ragnar's jaw clenched, his grip tightening on his club. Tell me, or I will make you tell me. The priest laughed. You are a fool, boy. A fool and a weakling, just like your father. You think you can threaten me? You think you can make me talk? He spun back, his daggers flashing, and lunged forward. But Kest was there. He drove his spear into the priest's chest. The priest looked down, his eyes widening as a dark stain blossomed. And then he fell, his body crumpling to the ground. Ragnar stood over him, his chest heaving, and tossed his makeshift club aside. He looked down at the hammer, lying on the floor where the priest had dropped it. He reached down, his fingers closing around the haft. It was icy to the touch. He lifted it up, feeling its weight settle into his hands. He turned to Kest. We did it. Kest nodded. And we showed that thief what happens when you try to mess with the Wolfsbane clan. You saved me, Kest, I won't forget that. Oh, I'll get my first kill band. Ragnar shook his head. No one can know about this. Kest thumped his chest. Creation will know. She will. He patted Kest on the back. Let's get home before my father returns. What do you think he meant by his master? Ragnar shrugged. The ravings of a madman. No, I think someone's plotting against your father. We should probably let him know. Ragnar pushed out his bottom lip. Probably. Chapter 6. The first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold as Ragnar and Kest crested the final hill overlooking Mirand. Ragnar clutched the Hammer of Wolfsbane under his furs. We'll need to be careful. If anyone catches us sneaking in at this hour, there'll be questions we can't answer. Kest nodded. I still can't believe we pulled it off. I mean, I always knew you were crazy, Rag, but this was a whole new level of insanity. Says the man who followed me into said insanity without a second thought. Someone has to keep you from getting yourself killed. Besides, I couldn't let you have all the glory now, could I? Ragnar rolled his eyes and grinned. Together they crept through the shadows of the courtyard. The castle stood still and silent, the only sound the distant chirping of birds and the ever-present whisper of the Brawn Sea. Ragnar led the way to the mead hall, his heart in his throat as he reached for the door. Stepping inside, he found the hall empty, the hearthfire long since burned down to embers. Ragnar let out a shaky breath and crossed the room to the alcove, his hands trembling as he drew back the curtain. He placed the hammer back on the pedestal. For a moment he simply stood there, gazing down at the weapon. Beside him, Kest let out a low whistle. Your father would be proud, if we could tell him. Before Ragnar could reply, the door opened. Ragnar spun around to find himself face to face with his uncle Olaf. The older man marched inside, then stopped. What are you doing here? Uncle, You were just what? Ragnar's mouth went dry. He glanced over at Kest. I don't know. I was just looking. That's all. Olaf's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting from Ragnar to the hammer and back again. Is that so? It's the truth, uncle. Olaf stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a curt nod, he shoved past Ragnar and approached the alcove, his hand reaching out to brush against the hammer's haft. Ragnar watched him with bated breath. Olaf turned back to face them. In future, nephew, I would advise against... His words trailed off, and he strode from the hall. Ragnar watched him go. That was too close, Kest said. I thought for sure he was going to figure it out. Ragnar nodded. He suspects something. I could see it in his eyes. He knows we're not telling the whole truth. What was he doing here? I thought he was out on the hunt. I don't know. Maybe they came back early. Kest frowned. You don't think he could have had something to do with the theft, do you? Ragnar's head snapped up, his eyes widening. What? No. Of course not. He would never betray us like that. I guess you're right. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Olaf is a loyal member of the clan, just like the rest of us. Ragnar nodded, trying to push down the unease that coiled in his gut. Come on. We should get back before anyone else starts asking questions. Just remember, we can't tell anyone. Kest grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. I know, shame though. Shame how? We're heroes, Rag, and only we can know about it. Seems unfair. Glory will come. Just not this time, huh? Ragnar shrugged. I'm sure when the bards come sniffing around for songs of my heroism, I might remember to add this one to the list. Kest cocked an eyebrow. Your heroism. Exactly. The end. Thanks for listening. To find out more about John Cronshaw and his work, visit johncronshaw.com. The Hammer of Wolfsbane is copyright 2020.